Good evening, wrestling fans, and welcome to this week's episode of SICW All-Star Wrestling Christmas. Just a couple of days away, and I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a very Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year from all of us here at SICW, from my family and all of our locker rooms family. It's that time of the year where we want to just have a good time, be merry, and get ready for the new year. And speaking of getting ready for the new year, January the 10th, 2025, a Friday night, mark that down, a Friday night, back at the Belclair Fairgrounds in Belleville, Illinois. Big match already signed, a big tag match. The SICW Classic champion himself, Kowalski, teams up with Big Nasty Glenn Williams. And when I talk about Big Nasty, he is big and nasty. And they're going to be looking across that squared circle against Belleville's own Bobby D. That's right, Belleville's favorite. And he's teaming up with the Silverback, Big Joe Helms. A lot of big men in that ring for that big main event. Then big news there. That's a Friday night at the Belclair Fairgrounds. The doors are going to open at 6 p.m. Bell time is at 7. You know, we're winding down 2024, and I can't think of a better way to kick off the new year with a big match on Friday night. Friday nights was the big nights at Kiel Auditorium when Sam Muchnick and Larry Matisek used to hold those monthly cards there, and we all went and got our tickets and had to be there, and bell time then was at 8:30. But as we've all got older, we want to start earlier and get home earlier, so that's why we start our at 7 p.m. and we'll get you home at a reasonable time. And then the good thing about this one in January, you come on Friday night, January the 10th. We'll do TV tapings the next day on the 11th, starting at noon at the East Cronlet Community Center at the studio there. You can come down there for free that Saturday afternoon and be a part of the TV tapings and see yourself right here on a Sunday night episode. So mark those two big dates down, January the 10th, a Friday night, and then January the 11th, a Saturday night at the East Cronlet studio at the East Cronlet Community Center. And it's going to be great as we start off 2025 because we're leading up to the big event in May, the Bruiser Brody Memorial. Yes, Bruiser Brody Memorial, May 16th and 17th. You've heard a lot about that so far, but you're going to hear a lot more about it. In fact, later on tonight, we've got a big announcement. So you don't want to go anywhere. You want to stay tuned because it's a barn burner. It's a slobber knocker. It's whatever you want to call it, a Donnybrook, as Larry Matisek used to say. And we'll be bringing that to you right here tonight. We're going to take a few moments, take a commercial break, and come back, and we're going to talk about something that started back in the late 1960s and how it's being reinvented. Stay tuned.
SICW presents FanFest 3, St. Louis, May 16th and 17th. Hilton, St. Louis Airport, Nakita Koloff, Missy Hyatt, Gangrel, Teddy Long and Mac Davis, Tito Santana, and Bill Apter. More to come. SICW FanFest 3. For more info, SICW.org.
Hey everybody, this is John Layfield, better known as JBL from the WWE, at one time the longest reigning WWE champion in SmackDown television history, the glory days of professional wrestling. If you like what you're watching, we've got on Backstage Pass, you got to get it now. What were they thinking? A wonderful program of me and Mr. Gerald Briscoe talking about the craziest stories in the history of professional wrestling, all with my partner, Mr. Briscoe, who hired me in 1995.
I hired you? What the hell was I thinking?
Well, fans, as promised, I'm going to take you back in time tonight. I have a couple of good friends that's going to join you here via video. My good friend Brian Ferguson from Bumps and Thumps. You've probably followed his podcast now for quite some time. He's always got special guests on. I've had the honor of being one of his guests on there. But he's brought on tonight a national historian, our good friend Mr. George Shire. And they're going to go back and talk about the organization called the WFIA. And when you hear that, I want you to listen to this, and then I want you to consider becoming a member of this, because the individual that started this organization, and it was defunct for some time, now they're trying to get it reestablished. A gentleman from St. Louis named Don Wilson was actually the founder, him and his wife, of the organization. So take a listen right now as my good friend Brian Ferguson and George Shire take us back and tell us all about this organization. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Welcome to another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today, coming back on one more time, wrestling historian, good friend of mine, Mr. George Shire. George, welcome back, my friend.
Good morning. Welcome back, I guess. I enjoy doing these, they're fun.
I know, and we enjoy having you on. We really do. So, subject today is the WFIA.
What are you gonna drop? What are you gonna drop kick me with today?
WFIA, Wrestling Fans International Association.
Yes.
Organization you were one time a part of. It went unfortunately went defunct in the 80s. A man now is attempting to bring it back. And I wanted to get your intake on it. You were part of it from the beginning. It started in the late 60s. And I just want, if we could, for our fans, kind of get your take on how it started, how it grew, and why, and okay, what was the concept of it, and how it grew, and things of that nature. So let's talk about the beginning, okay, how it was started, created, kind of your input on that, if we could.
Well, it started officially back in 1968. Mm-hmm. And it was started by a guy named Don Wilson and his wife at the time, Judy Wilson. They lived in St. Louis, so they were St. Louis wrestling fans, and Don had been around the business for quite a few years back at that time. And the whole idea, Brian, is a lot of times our newer fans out there in our fast-paced world that we live in today, a lot of people don't realize that it goes back in those old days. And 55 years ago, that's a long time ago. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any type of resource to connect with wrestling fans in other territories, unless you did it by the old snail mail, become pen pals with someone. Yeah. Which a lot of us did. That was the only way maybe we could connect with a person in St. Louis or some other city. And so the fan clubs were a huge part of that era back in the late 60s into the 70s. And for those people that don't know, a fan club back in the day, a wrestling fan in a particular territory or city, they could approach a certain wrestler and, say, I like your wrestling. I've always followed you. I'd like to start a fan club for you. And most of those wrestlers, the vast majority, they will say, you can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to help you. I don't want to be involved. Just go ahead, take your pictures, put out your bulletin, put in my results, whatever you want. But the key thing is they had to have what was called a permission slip from the wrestler. So little slip of paper that I, Johnny Valentine, agree to let, Dawn Porter, she was the president of I pulled that out of my butt here. She was the president of the Johnny Valentine fan club back in the day, that I give her permission to run a fan club in my honor. Now, the reason the fan club permission slip was important, because Don Wilson used to do, in Wrestling Review magazine back in that era, they used to have a fan club review or a fan club column in the magazine. And what Don would do is he would review your bulletin when you sent it to him, your Johnny Valentine bulletin. He'd look at it. There were promises that were made, that in this case, this Dawn Porter, she was going to send the person that joined the club an 8x10 of Johnny Valentine. and she'd put out 2 bulletins a year or however number it was, and you get a membership card, and that made you an official member of Johnny Valentine. And a fan in those days, that was a big deal. Hey, I'm 12 years old, I'm 15 years old, 20 years old, I'm a member of this club. And so Don would review those. And there were other, in wrestling world, there was a lady named at the time, she was Georgie Ann Macropoulos, Miraculous or something. I always mess up her name, but she later became Georgie Ann Orsi, O-R-S-I. And if you looked at old wrestling worlds, you'd see that name. She was a very astute wrestling fan, did a lot of research work, primarily for Bruno Sammartino back in the day. And she ran a Bruno Sammartino fan club. So she had the fan club column in wrestling world. So Don Wilson would look at these, and the idea is that we wanted this to be above board. We didn't want some fan just putting something out there and saying, if you send me $1.50 or $2, which it was back in those days, you give me $1.50 and I'll send you 4 bulletins and an 8x10. But you didn't want people getting the money and then not doing what they said. So Don Wilson and Georgie Ann, those were 2 of them. They would look at these bulletins, and believe me, in those days, I have blank paper here, but they were 3-4 pieces of blank or of paper with a staple in them, and they were a bulletin, showing the wrestler's results or whatever it was, and some, stuff from the territory. So he'd look at it and make sure that they got what and then he would endorse it in the fan club column. That, I've received this, I've received a couple bulletins, it's very nicely done. I encourage you, if you're a Johnny Valentine fan, send Dawn, and here's her address and information. And the other side of it was it was a policeman type thing, because if I had sent my money into Dawn Porter and I didn't get anything, and it's 2 years or a year now, and I gave her my hard work $1.50 back in the day, I'd let Don Wilson or Georgie Ann or maybe some other fan club person know, and they're no longer going to endorse it. And they might actually put in there, we haven't received a bulletin from this person for a long time, no update news, use caution when joining the group, or we'd suggest you don't at all. That's what it was. It was self-policed, and it worked out beautifully. So the fan clubs were rampant back in the day. I mean, every noted wrestler for some reason seemed to have a fan club. And but it worked really well. And Don Wilson then decided it would be, and I know he had some other people involved at the time, but he came up with the idea. He says, we got these fans that are interested in these fan clubs and these wrestlers, and they're kind of our lifeline to some of these territories with getting results. And if these people were credible, we should get together and have maybe a reunion. Well, the reunion idea was great, because then Don would go into a territory and he'd work with the promoter or promotion of that particular city, and they'd put on this 2 or 3 day event in a hotel, agree with the promotion that the promotion would send 3 or 4 or 5 wrestlers to come into the mingle with the crowd. And then in conjunction with this, the promotion would hold a wrestling card on one of the nights of and usually it'd be around their normal schedule. So they didn't have to change their schedule at all, whatever night they ran. St. Louis, I use that as an example because they used to run Friday nights typically. Yeah. And so they'd have a Friday night card, and they'd have all their fans from the International or Wrestling Fans International show up and have a section that were designated for them in the Kiel Auditorium. That along with an awards banquet. And what would happen is that Don, again, along with his group of people that were his advisors and helpers on the club, they would make sure that the promotion was recognized by, whoever the top wrestler was in the territory. They would get the Wrestler of the Year award. Miraculously, it was voted that they were the Wrestler of the Year. And they'd have maybe a tag team of the year, just a couple, and they'd give them little tiny plaques or something, have them come to the banquet that they do this at the WFIA hotel. And then they would also give out fan club awards. the idea was that most of the people that came to these reunions at the time were most of the fan club presidents of the various fan clubs, and they could have in the reunion room, they would have displays. They could put up their Johnny Valentine display. Would be a chance for them to offer memberships to their club to people coming in. Then Bruno Sammartino had his club there, Georgianne. That's where I met her originally. I met her in Boston at one of the reunions.
Oh, wow.
WFIA.
Okay.
And then Marilee Netzil, there's an old name. She ran a Jimmy Valiant fan club, and so on and so on. So the idea was it was the first exposure for young fans like me at the time, because 55 years ago, I'm a babe in arms. And you get to maybe meet some of these wrestlers you've heard about in the wrestling magazines if you hadn't seen them, and you get to talk with them very briefly. And nobody ever broke kayfabe. Oh my goodness, those wrestlers were in strict kayfabe mode. I mean, in '68 and going forward. But the idea was that it was a chance for the fans to get together, and every year it was in a different city. So as fans, there were some of them that were so rabid that they would make sure they attended every single one. And obviously there was travel involved then.
Yeah.
I had told you the other day when we were briefly talking about this, that the WFIA reunion the first one was founded in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, and it just wasn't on the radar, I guess, it was held in, of all places, Mankato, Minnesota. Now, for our listeners that don't know about Mankato, it's a southern city in Minnesota, smaller town, but it used to be, in its day, they would have great spot show wrestling cards.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, those cards were run by Norman Kietzer, who, as we all know, was famous for his great wrestling news magazines and all through the decades and programs that he did. So that was the first one. And for some reason, I wasn't there, but I don't know why. It would have been about an hour's drive from my house, hour and a half's drive from my house. I would have been there, but I wasn't. So they awarded Tiny Mills Wrestler of the Year award. And the only reason Tiny Mills got it was because Tiny Mills was one of the wrestlers that agreed that he would be there. The wrestling office, Minneapolis Wrestling Club would send 2 or 3 guys. And okay, Tiny Mills, who had now been retired for, semi-retired for a few years, he was Wrestler of the Year. But it was fun because you got to meet him and that sort of thing. So then next year and the year after and so on, the very first one I ever personally went to, and a lot of it was because I was still a kid and it was money. I had a paper route when I was up until the time I was about 19, and I was making a whopping $45, $50 a month on paper route money, and at that point, of course, I'm a millionaire. You know how it is back then.
Yeah.
So as long as I had money to buy my comic books at the drugstore and the latest wrestling review in Wrestling World, I was as happy as a pig slopping in mud. There you have it. So the first one I went to, and this was when I met Don Wilson. The first one, and surprisingly, it was in St. Louis. And by that time, I had become friends with a lady named Lillian Schnur. Okay. Yes, I think it was SCHNUR or something, Lillian Schnur. And she was a wrestling fan in St. Louis. And of course, St. Louis was where Don Wilson lived. And I had been trading St. Louis programs with her and that old pen pal system. It was, I'll send you mine, you send me yours. Mm-hmm. So I'd send her the Minneapolis program, she'd send me the St. Louis program, and I started that collection. And when this St. Louis WFIA came about, I thought, God, I got to figure out a way to go to this. I mean, this would be fun. So in August of 71, for those that want to know how old this old codger is, I was still 19 back then. And I decided I could branch out and this would be the first time I'd get on an airplane because I led a very sheltered life. Now, my family never went. We were lucky if we took the bus. So I was going to go on an airplane and fly to St. Louis. And so it was all new to me. But you talk about a kid, they talk about like a kid in the candy store. When I went to St. Louis and got to the hotel, I was totally in awe because they had all these displays around, all these fan club bulletins that were being displayed. And there were some of the people that I'd read about in the magazines that, some of the fans.
Mhm.
And Don Wilson, got to know him. Don Wilson and I had a friendship after that. And there were several times when I would go to St. Louis after that. I would actually, he'd have me stay at his house.
Oh, wow.
And him and Judy would, have other fans, of course, do that from time to time. But I got to stay at his house and get to know him. He was just a super guy. And he really held the WFIA in high esteem.
Mhm.
It was very important to him to have these reunions. And they were called conventions back then. They weren't reunions. They were WFIA annual conventions. But most of the time directed towards fan clubs. So,
Right.
and each year it seemed like they grew more and more. Excuse me. Now, the key thing about these reunions was that as fans, again, trading programs, trading bulletins, trading clippings, sharing wrestling stories, learning about wrestlers in territories that we couldn't get to, we really had a base of fantastic friendships that were forged.
Mhm.
So when you go down a list of names from those old days, and you have guys like Vicky Goddard, Scott Teal, Jim Melby, of course, was on the list, but Tom
Mhm.
Burke, Dave Brzezinski, Diane Devine, Marilee Nedziel, and Georgianne Orsi. And the list just goes on and on. Danny Goddard, Lenny Bernstein. I should have made a list before we started talking, but friendships that have lasted 55 years.
Yeah.
And just because they weren't your average wrestling fan. That was the key thing to remember. Because you
Right.
and I have talked in the past, Brian, there were times when a person became a wrestling fan because they liked Ivan Putski. So he was here for 6 months and they go to the matches. When Ivan Putski's gone, they don't go back anymore. Or
Yeah.
their life gets in the way. They
Mhm.
transferred, they got a job somewhere else, or their wife didn't like it, or whatever the story was.
Mhm.
Wrestling wasn't on when they were able to watch it. We couldn't, way before VCRs and CD players and, taping on TV. So you couldn't do any of that. So fans faded away
Yeah.
and they were done. But these were serious wrestling fans.
Mhm.
And so all, those names I mentioned and many, 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 many more, Pete Letterberg was one of them. These were people that I became friends with, others became friends with, and we're still friends today for those that are still with us.
Yeah.
And just a special bond. So that's how it originally started. Now, I'm
Okay.
going to take a sip of coffee and you
Yeah.
figure out.
No, I agree with you about the friendship thing. I mean, you and I became friends because of wrestling and our passion for it. Old school. I've been to some places now that I've made a lot of friendships, and no, I don't get to see them in person all the time, but we keep up through social media, and when we do go to some type of reunion or convention or whatever, it's like you could talk to them, you could start up from the last conversation you had, like nothing in between got in the way, and you can still talk and mingle and go back to right where you left off at from the last time, and that's the great part of those type of friendships. So you started in the 70s, and each year was in a different spot. So was it more of like, let's say if it's in you said Boston, right? So was that the WWF back then?
Yeah.
that would
Well,
bring in some
it
guys?
was the WWWF.
So
It
like
was still
Bruno
Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
okay, Worldwide Wrestling. So they bring in Bruno or maybe Pedro Morales or somebody like that.
What we did in the Boston one, which was 1972, the reunion was held in June of 72, and it was in Boston. The promoter, the local promoter in Boston, who was a promoter under the Worldwide Wrestling Federation banner of promoters, okay, used all the East Coast guys. The promoter's name was Abe Ford. He ran cards in the Boston Gardens, which was their big arena back in the day. And he used all the I'm just going to say WWF because the WWW, it gets all. So the WWF card. He used wrestlers, from the WWF and would put on a card. And we had a card at the Boston Gardens in conjunction to that. And I do remember the main event. It was, of all things, Pedro Morales defending the WWF championship against, of all people, Captain Lou Albano.
Oh, wow.
Lou Albano, and he wasn't captain yet. He was just Lou Albano. But boy, I still have this stuff from time to time.
That's okay. That's all right.
Crazy. So Lou Albano was still he was managing, but hadn't gotten to the prestigious status he did later on. But when Don Wilson contacted for the Boston reunion, it was a matter of working with Abe Ford, conjunction with his wrestling card and the hotel setup and everything. And Abe Ford then had certain wrestlers that would come into the display room, is what I call it, and mingle with the fans. The key thing too, and I want to say this, and this is not a knock for those of you that are heavily involved in this, but there are fan fests all over the country today. And it's great because it gives fans a chance to see some of their heroes of past years and maybe get pictures with them and autographs and whatever. But the fan fests are a lot different in the sense, Brian, that most of the time you pay a fee to go to this thing. You pay a fee to have the certain wrestlers, to get their autograph and stand in line. And a lot of times some of the wrestlers even charge themselves for, to have their autograph and maybe have a picture taken with them. So those fan fests, they're different in that regard. Whereas the WFIA was the promotion worked with the WFIA, brought a few wrestlers in, and you could freely get their autograph if you asked them on your program or your WFIA wrestling program.
There it is.
Banquet. This is the St. Louis one, and they give you the whole lineup of what's going to take place. All the dates and times are on here of the events for the 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
And you get your chance to, be part of that little group for that 3 days. So they are run a little bit different.
Yeah. I was going to ask you the cost. So you kind of brought up the financial part of it. So my understanding is back then the WFIA worked with the promotion. They probably set up some kind of deal. Coming into the hotel. I guess my question is, you might not know the answer, is, cost-wise, the hotel, getting these guys in there, you said they signed your program, or if they had a photograph of them for free. I guess I'm assuming that WFIA paid for the hotel, the space, maybe gave some money for the event to the card for the wrestlers, and then the promotion would cover the cost of getting those guys there. I'm not sure. Can you kind of explain that, or if you know that?
Yeah. You're a little bit off on all of it. So let's explain it this way.
Okay.
We would pay dues, if you want to call them that, to the WFIA. And believe me, I don't remember what it was back then as a younger person. You know, if it was $5 or $3 or whatever it was, you'd pay dues to be a member of the WFIA. When you'd go to their reunion, you were in charge of your own airfare, of course, to whatever city it was at, or how you were going to get there. You were in charge of it. They would rent a block of rooms in the hotel, or not rent, they would secure a block of rooms for the number of fans that they anticipated or had paid to, been members to come. You indicated you were going to come.
Yeah.
And you'd have this block of rooms set off. Then, of course, they would have the banquet room / display room in the hotel. All hotels have these even today, where you can hold gatherings and different things. So, but it was all on our dime.
Okay.
We paid the WFIA dues. They would also then secure a block of tickets from the wrestling office. So we did have a wrestling ticket provided for us, but we had to pay for our own hotel. We had to pay for our own airfare or travel. And I do recall that there may have been a banquet fee or something that the fan had to pay, whatever it was. And some of the guys that were, behind the scenes on this, Tom Burke and some of these great guys, Brzezinski, they could tell you probably a little deeper on that, but because I personally don't remember. I just know that when I went, it was on my dime. And but as far as the wrestlers go, the other thing that's really different about the WFIA back in the day was when you had the wrestlers, like when I was at the Boston one that I had mentioned, in the bank or during the course of the couple days, we had the Grand Wizard, Ernie Roth.
Ernie Roth, yeah.
Who was walking around. He was mingling with the group. The Fabulous Moolah, the lady wrestler, lady champion, she was mingling around. In fact, I have a unique story about her that personally happened to me. Handsome Jimmy Valiant was one of the wrestlers because he was in the WWF at the time. I know there's a few I'm missing, but they would be there, not all the time, but maybe a select time period.
Right.
These wrestlers, they didn't come in to sell their memorabilia. There was no such thought process in those days. So they weren't there with an agenda to sell their books. They didn't have books back then that they put out. They didn't sell, pictures of themselves, and they didn't charge you for your autograph. The promotion would just have them go in and say, go there between 9 and 10 or whatever it was, and give the fans a chance to talk with you. And they were always very cordial. And obviously, some of the fan club, Mary Lilette Ned Zeal, the reason I keep bringing that name up, because she was living in Boston. And she was president of the Jimmy Valiant fan club at the time. So she was there with her fan clubs, trying to get her club represented and trying to get new members. And so it was really more of just a gathering of friends. And when you talked with the wrestler and you got their autograph, they had no agenda where, well, I'll do it for you for $5 or $10, or I don't do autographs or any of that stuff like some of the wrestlers would do. And the only time they would appear to somewhat break kayfabe, and yet they still weren't, is that when I went up to Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard, I chatted with him for a couple of minutes. I told him at the time, I said, I remember when I used to get my Detroit programs and you were there as Abdullah Farouk managing the Sheik. And I remember I told him, I said, and I know you had another name in wrestling too. I was always a wise guy back then, giving people facts. I said, I remember that you managed Magnificent Maurice and Johnny Barron, and you were known as J. Rellington Radcliffe. He kind of looked at me and says, well, you kind of follow it around, don't you? And I mean, he didn't break any kayfabe or anything. And I remember getting his autograph. I had a great picture taken with him, which I still have. And so that was it though. That was my relationship with Ernie Roth. But that's what the wrestlers did. He didn't say, I'm not going to sign an autograph or no, get away from me, kid, or anything. So, but he was a heel. I mean, Abdullah Farouk, the Grand Wizard, they were heels personified in the business. And that's how it worked. It was, whereas today now, and again, the Fan Fest, they gather fans together, and that's so great that we can keep the wrestling community together and growing. But most of the time, and I mean, you go to some of these, I know you do.
Yeah.
And you know what costs you? Sometimes you got to, rip out a kidney and lay it on the table to get some of the autographs and maybe even have a chance to chat with these guys. So it's a little bit different today. And now they want to sell you their stuff. And so it's a little bit different, but it's still a good thing. And Fan Fest, all the people that do them, please keep doing them. They're great.
Yeah. I will say that the CAC reunion, when I went there last fall, it is much less expensive to get an autograph. And most of the wrestlers that were there this past time, when they collected most of them were like $20. It wasn't a kidney, but most of them gave all that money back to the club.
Yeah,
which
I bless them for. Yeah,
that's why I got a lot of autographs there, because when they said, "Hey, this money's going back to the CAC," okay. Where most of the other ones, it's a fan fest. It's for them and the vendor.
Well,
so later,
let me touch on that real quick. So with CAC, they have kind of changed over the years. I mean, the CAC each year over the last 23, 24 years has gotten a little bit more totally fan-based. Whereas originally when I started going to CAC reunions, it was still a gathering of friends, but it was a gathering of the wrestlers more than it was for the fans. Because before fans were ever involved in CAC, the CAC was an annual gathering of wrestlers where they got together and they all shared their old war stories together and mended old fences between them. And I haven't seen you in 30 years. God, I love you, man. And that sort of thing. So we had an incident, and this is why it's always important when you talk about how these things are run. And this goes back, boy, I want to say maybe 15 years. We were at a CAC in the big room that they have with all the displays and the tables, the vendor tables, they call them. And Superstar Billy Graham was there. And I think that was like one of the only years that he attended. He was there and he was selling. He wouldn't let people take a picture of him unless you paid him. And he would charge for his autograph. Well, that was the first time that this had been happening. Because typically when a wrestler was there, they would mingle with the fans and sure, I'll give you my autograph. How are you? And where'd you come from? And, small talk with the fan. And it was very fan friendly, much like what WFIA was. Well, Superstar was doing this and he was refusing to let people take some pictures and different things. So Nick Bockwinkel was the president of the CAC at the time. And he actually went up to Superstar and he said, Billy, this is not the place to be in character, to be doing this to the fans. This is a fan organization and we're not going to have you doing this. And I remember Nick saying, he says, I don't like having to go up to the guy and tell him this, but he's got the wrong idea. So that tells you how it's changed. Because today the Fan Fest would be typically where the person or persons putting on the Fan Fest are paying all these wrestlers to probably come there, securing hotels for them. And then the wrestlers themselves are charging whatever they charge, whether they're selling their book or their photos or whatever it is. And you want a picture with me, that's $5 or $10. And, so it's different. But CAC has become a little bit more like that now, where a lot of the guys are there to sell their stuff. And but if they give it back to the CAC,
Yeah.
God bless them, because that's the whole idea. And I will
Yeah.
add that just as an end to the superstar thing, Superstar Graham, the CAC many years ago assisted him with some money to take care of some of his health woes. You know, the guy had to have I think it was a liver transplant, and
Mhm.
you know, he's
Right.
had a magnitude of health issues for various reasons over the decades. And CAC
Right.
did assist him, and so he needs to be thankful for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah. All right. Let's close real quick. So WFIA, for whatever reason, kind of went south in the 80s. And now they're Brad Drake is trying to get it back up and running, and I am a part of it. I will put that out there. He contacted me, and I told him I would definitely contribute in any way I can, and I'm excited about it. I hope it takes off. I hope it goes in the direction that is for the fans, and we don't, right now, from what I understand, it's all you join as a member. It's free. They do have some merchandise that he's put up there, a t-shirt, a coffee mug, and a couple other items. And that all goes, it's not going in his pocket. He's trying to build a base here. So, and it is international. It's not just the title. We do have a person on there from Great Britain, I think his name is Tony Ford, I believe. And so we're excited. And George, I'm so happy you were able to come on here today and kind of give us the history of it. And, I always enjoy having you on here, my friend. I really do. So thank you again for coming on.
I'm always glad to come on, and I do hope that this works out. And I want to say that on board here, that Brad Drake has reached out to me, and you and I talked about this beforehand. I have not at this point responded to Brad, because I've wanted to kind of go in with tiptoes. I know there's a lot of the people that are still around that were active when the WFIA was originally around that hold it near and dear to their hearts. Tom Burke, Dave Brzezinski, Pete Letterman, Barry Rose, and many others. And I'm one of those guys, although I wasn't as involved behind the scenes as they were. But it's important that if this organization can get off the ground, that it is shown new respect and brought back to its former greatness, rather than what occurred in the 80s with an individual that ran it after Don Wilson had been gone from it, and that didn't do a good job with it. And we don't even need to bring up his name, because that gives him airtime. So we're cautious. I will reach out to Brad in what way I can assist him. But if he's got Tom Burke and guys like that on board, and yourself, I think that's a good step, and I would support that all the way. Thank you for letting me come on, and
thank you.
Always fun.
I appreciate it. I always enjoy your perspective and your opinions, because you're so professional about it, you're respectful, and you're also your knowledge. You have such knowledge that you never, how do I say this? Your opinion is fact. It's not just your opinion, it's actually a fact. So that's what's so great, is that you can back it up. Where
I'm going to play all of this. I'm going to play all this last part to my wife. What you're saying, okay?
I don't know about your personal wrestling. No,
I know. Hey, thank you, Brian.
I always enjoy having you. No, I know. I always enjoy having you on here. Thank you so much, George. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, George Shire, Mr. George Shire. Sir, thanks for coming on. If you're wondering about my T-shirt, real quick, the villain. Okay, it's not.
Well, you are. You're the villain persona.
Or I'm not a villain. George is not a villain. It's a professional wrestler out of Mid States Wrestling named Tim, the Natural Born Villain Rockwell. I bought this shirt. I thought today, you know what, I'm gonna wear it, promote this guy. He's an outstanding. If you get a chance to go to one of the events or watch it on YouTube or something, the guy he just looks like a villain. And he just plays the part so well. So anyways, one more time, Mr. George Shire, sir, thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure. And folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And if you can, go to the website, the WFIA.org. That's THEWFIA.org. Check it out. It's free to join. Folks, thanks for watching and listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, there you have it, fans. A trip back in time. That organization first started back in the late 60s, so I think around 1968. And it's a great organization. They're trying to get established, so please stay tuned. You're going to hear a lot more about that organization as information comes out. Brian does a great job of keeping a lot of information out there. A lot of us are alike. We're wrestling fans, and we want to be part of these organizations. I'm fortunate to be a member of that committee, and I'm looking forward to doing whatever we can to reestablish that organization so we can keep the memories and the legacy of these wrestlers that we've grew up with alive out there. It's one of those great organizations that I'm really proud to be a part of. Okay, right now I want to take our final commercial break for this evening. When we come back, the big announcement that I told you was going to be made is coming right your way. Stay tuned.
Tune in every Sunday night right after SICW All-Star Wrestling for the Falls Count Everywhere podcast, streaming live at 9 p.m. Central Time on Facebook and YouTube. Join your hosts, the Gym City Mouth, Z-Miz, and ring veteran Rough Cut Rick Ruby as they bring you notable backstage news from the wrestling world, promoting upcoming wrestling shows from other companies around multiple local regions, and an in-depth interview with a featured guest in the professional wrestling industry every week. Follow, like, and subscribe to Falls Count Everywhere on Facebook and YouTube, also available on Twitter at the FCE Podcast.
Wrestling fans, more big news coming to you about SICW Fan Fest 3. More on the inductions into the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame. Nick Rednire and I have put our thoughts together, had looked at some of the stats, and we decided that a former Missouri State Heavyweight Champion, one of the biggest men in the professional wrestling business that could stand square foot and do a drop kick like nobody else. We're talking about the man from Stone Mountain, Georgia, Jerry the Crusher Blackwell, will be inducted into the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame at the SICW Fan Fest on Saturday, May 16th and 17th. That's right, the Crusher had many, many battles against Bruiser Brody, Kamala the Ugandan Giant, you name it. He was on the only show that was ever produced at the St. Louis Fox Theater by SICW back when Sam Muchnick and Larry Matisek was still with us. So Jerry Blackwell is going to be taking his place into the St. Louis Wrestling Hall of Fame at FanFest 3, May 16th and 17th, 2025. Hope to see you there.
I am, yeah.
The only psycho here is me. Who will be coming?
Awesome, I can't wait, man. I thoroughly enjoyed my guys that's supposedly coming.
We're gonna overwhelm each other, so.
I got a question.
Belong. Those belts were around their waist.
Hold on. Let me speak.
Finally, we've been waiting for you to come.
This
All right, now just announced by Mr. Joel Maximo. What else you got?
Lucas wants a new belt.
Whoa.
I wish I could, what is it, Vic?
That's not even the real 2360.
Snapchat?
No sign.
Alright.
But today I got a very special guest.
If you don't know who I am,
I will never follow Papa Dank on Twitter.
Have been my favorite wrestlers, and it's like the person.
Well, wrestling fans, there you have it. And as promised, the big news that you've all been waiting for. May 16th and 17th, SICW Fan Fest 3, as you know, is a go. You've seen some of the legends that we've been posting. You've seen the stars that are coming. But tonight, I am happy, I'm honored, I'm excited to announce that, yes, the one and only Kevin Von Erich will be appearing at the Fan Fest on May 16th and 17th of 2025. That's right, Kevin Von Erich will be there. He can't wait to get back to St. Louis. For those of you who may know or you follow us, Kevin was born over in Illinois, in Belleville, Illinois. He's excited to come back. He's excited to see the fans. He loves St. Louis. He loves Sam Muchnick. He loved Larry Matisek, and he'll have some great stories to tell when he's here. But that is a slobber knocker. I mean, when you have Kevin Von Erich amongst all the other greats that have already signed on, and we're not done yet. I can tell you there's other organizations out there, other vendors that have contacted me, but Kevin Von Erich, that's right, we've been trying to get him back for FanFest 1 and 2. His schedules wouldn't match up, but we were finally able to lock him down for May 16th and 17th, 2025. He'll be here on that Saturday. And stay tuned because we got several more months to talk about this. But that's the news. Kevin Von Erich coming to SICW Fan Fest 3. Get your tickets now. I'm telling you, they're going to, if you thought they were going fast now, after tonight, they are going to be on fire. Go to SICW.org and get your tickets. You can book your rooms. You can purchase your tickets right there. We've made it simple. All you got to do now is just go on there and purchase them. Still not too late to make it a Christmas gift for that special person. That's all we have for this week's episode. What a night. Thanks to Brian Ferguson and George Schauer, and thanks to Kevin Von Erich. And we'll see you coming May of 2025.